Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. I'm Sean Aylmer, and as always, I'm joined by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekook.com and on Twitter using the handle thekook. You will also find him on weekends like we've just had, potentially at the TAB, or maybe it's all online now. You might even find him at the track. Stephen, did you have a good weekend when it comes to thoroughbreds?
I did. I managed to stab a few winners around the various tracks, but yeah, the long weekend for Easter has some great horses running around still, and I was lucky, made up for some of the earlier losses in weeks gone by. So still a little behind, but not as much as I was.
Well, that's good. That's good. Look, let's just dip into last week first. The labour force figures, 4% unemployment rate. What did you make of them?
A good number. Now, in a sense, there was, I can't believe it, there was a little bit of disappointment from a number of the analysts who were writing up the number and the way it was reported. But at the end of the day, we still had just under 18,000 jobs created. So that's a really solid result. Yes, it's not a blockbuster 50,000 or some of the numbers that we got used to in the last 6 months or so, but it's a good result in terms of employment. And then the unemployment rate staying at 4% was, again, a good result. The fact that it didn't hit, a sub 4% rate again was somewhat disappointing. But if you'd have said to just about anybody 12 months ago, or even pre-pandemic for that matter, that we're going to have a 4.0% unemployment rate in the middle of 2022, no one would have believed you, for one. And if it did happen, they would have said, well, gee, that's a fantastic result. And it is. It's just confirming all of the other issues in the economy that we've been chatting about in recent times, that the economy is in pretty good shape. It's growing. Demand for labour is still strong, and it's showing up in a near 48-year low for the unemployment rate. So they were good numbers at the end of the day, even if they didn't give that wow factor when they were released.
Consumer sentiment, though, seems to be falling. It has done for the last 5 months, in fact.
Yeah, a soft result again. I think even though we've sort of saving a few cents on our petrol with the change that occurred to excise in the budget, I think there is a genuine cost of living issue out there in the economy. And we consumers, while we're doing pretty well, as we just noted, the unemployment rate's low, so that's a good thing. But our wages still seem to be lagging behind the increase in inflation, the cost of living, and that's probably just weighing on sentiment. Things like the geopolitical things, I'm not quite sure how the Russia-Ukraine thing would be feeding into people's minds, but it's not a good news story, obviously, and it would be just another slight negative. And, of course, the election campaign, consumers tend to turn off a bit. And, again, I don't know whether there's just a bit of oh, God, the economy is going to be being spoken about by these politicians for the next 5 or 6 weeks, and people turned off a little bit. Not sure why, but, again, it's not catastrophic, but it was just a bit weaker than I guess you'd like it to be.
Okay, so that was last week. Now we have another short week this week, not a lot coming out. The Reserve Bank minutes of its board meeting of a couple of weeks ago. I suppose there's nothing much new in it, but it is interesting. Since then, we've had the Bank of New Zealand and the Central Bank in Canada increase their official rates by 50 basis points, which are really, really big hikes in both those cases. Inflation figures in the US and in Britain really, really high, like at 40 and 30-year highs respectively. Within the Reserve Bank, I understand that they want to wait until we get inflation readings within sustainable levels and not be preemptive, but the rest don't seem to be doing that.
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair point. And while the minutes will probably just sort of convey the fact that the economy is doing well, inflation is picking up, but it's not yet a worry to the RBA. The other thing that they've been highlighting in recent months is that they want to see this low unemployment rate actually translated into a wages pickup. And while there's lots of tentative evidence and anecdotal evidence that that's happening, the hard data on wages isn't yet showing that pickup in wages. But Dr. Lowe also said recently that this is more to do with quantitative easing, interestingly, but I'm sure it's the same to do with official rates, that what happens in the rest of the world is important to us, that, if every other economy was printing money, which they were, then we needed to do the same. Otherwise, the currency fluctuations would be more severe. So that's one issue. And while the Aussie dollar has been relatively calm, as you noted, that the 50-point moves from New Zealand and Canada were big moves. Obviously, we've still got a cash rate now that's well below these other countries, and again, it would be feeding into the deliberations that are coming up in the weeks ahead. And just, again, I guess the big issue, which is more for next week, will be the March quarter CPI. But for here and now, the RBA is sort of playing it cool. They've sort of got the dead hand on monetary policy. They're willing to sort of see the whites of the eyes, if you like, of the inflation pressures coming through before they actually pull the trigger. So absolutely fascinating times at the bank.
The other one, Kook, and I use your nickname deliberately in this case, the pre-election fiscal outlook. Now, it's one of those things which only people like you, Kook, could get too excited about. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I think you're right. I think that's the short answer. Look, what the PFO, pre-election fiscal outlook, is the heads of the Department of Treasury and Finance getting together and producing their own budget update. We only had the budget, 3 weeks ago? Time flies, doesn't it? And that, of course, is a political document. Mr. Frydenberg and Mr. Birmingham, the Treasurer and the Finance Minister, have their names on the cover of the budget documents. But what happened under the Charter of Budget Honesty is that there was always a concern that those budget numbers were fiddled, to be blunt, and that when we had the election campaign up and running, the Charter of Budget Honesty insisted or demanded that the heads of Treasury and Finance produce their own budget numbers. Now, the question for most people who are vaguely interested in this issue will be, will there be a material change in either the economic forecasts in the budget? Short answer is there might be a tweak, but not much. And the bottom line numbers, the budget deficit numbers that were presented a few weeks ago, there might be a little bit, because I think when the budget was printed 3 weeks ago or so, that they had much different assumptions for things like interest rates. And of course, that impacts public debt interest costs. So there might be a sort of a few $1 billion difference on the budget bottom line, but that'll be it. And other than getting a cursory glance from people like me, I don't think it's going to figure in either the financial markets or, for that matter, the election campaign.
Fair enough, Stephen. Have a good week.
Thank you, Sean.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kook. You can find him at thekook.com, TheKouk.com, and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kook. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.